Hello, I'd like to introduce you today to the cyber event horizon. So switch on the anti-gravs, pull up the space boots, and I hope the ride won't be too rocky. Data, data everywhere, and no time to think. Poor old Carphone Warehouse, for example, I think has been hit so many times that they just seem to be regularly in the news. I did try to do a little bit of research to find out how many times. I'm not really sure whether this was supposed to be the result that the Google adverts wanted me to get on this occasion. So as a university professor, perhaps I'd better be a little scientific and look at the trends in the cyber attacks that we're having to suffer. The Salford couple who were found to be putting banking Trojans on people's PCs and stealing their credentials. The infamous Ashley Madison hack. I'm not sure whether the pink paisley cravat was a good fashion choice that day. TalkTalk, mentioned already, come up again for another time. The accusations of nation upon nation, perhaps not what Lord Reith thought about when he started the BBC. British Airways, not your usual download of large amounts of data, but the patient and sneaky sitting on a piece of software and harvesting people's credit card details and the like as they were being put in. And even recently, some people might doubt whether this is a security event if people are collating data using Excel. But security is about confidentiality, integrity and availability. So if the integrity of that data is flawed, that also is an issue. Now, looking through these, I don't know whether you can spot what the trend is. I'll put you out of your misery. I'm not sure whether it'll put you out of mine. It's about time that we really stop calling it data protection and recognizing the real impact of online harms so that we can see the threats and manage the risks in a holistic way. Because these things affect voting. Don't we know about the arguments that ensue? It's even as important to be able to prove the veracity, of course, as it is to prove where skullduggery has taken place. Operations of organisations and the way they work can be interrupted. Just think about what you can learn about an organisation by taking its data, who does what, how it's structured. Stopping entire industries, stopping entire power supplies to countries can now be a thing and probably has been for quite some time. Revenge, as they say, is a dish best served cold, but what if it comes off a hot server? And why not save yourself billions of pounds in developing your arms or other materials by stealing the intellectual property of others? And there's plenty of money still to be out there, plenty of data for sale and resale, and just when you think you've got your trusted network in place, you have to think about the insider threat too. But all of these issues have one thing in common. It's not the data that suffers, it's the people. And rather than focusing on resilience, we do tend to spend too much time at the beginning of an incident thinking about who to blame rather than focusing on keeping the organisation and its services up and running. There's time later when we can look at a ransom note and think, aha, this has been written by a North Korean pretending to be a Chinese person writing English. Bad things will continue to happen online. In terms of their seriousness, the National Cybersecurity Centre has devised this categorisation system for cybersecurity incidents. But what it means in practice is that whoever is looking at you, drawing their plans against you and attacking you or your clients or customers online are likely to be successful if they're targeting you. And the truth is, of course, that you need to think about who you're going to call, because not many people in our cybersecurity categories here from the National Cybersecurity Centre are going to get attention from the authorities. Trying to imagine what the internet looks like is probably not a terribly useful exercise, but it did get my imagination when I saw it represented so. That graphic representation of the internet rather got me thinking of space, which of course Douglas Adams said was so big that we might have thought it was a long way down the road to the chemist, but that's just peanuts to space. Now, of course, what we're told to do for cybersecurity and resilience is complex as the problem that we're trying to solve. And that's fine and to be expected, because that is in accordance with the law of requisite variety. But that variety and complexity, of course, gets compounded by the fact that none of us works alone and we all rely on other people and our supply chains. And quite often it's difficult to know when we've got to our destination. And it's even more difficult if our collective destination is that abstract concept of resilience. It was when I was looking at that abstract picture of the internet and comparing it to space that I thought about the recent photography of the black hole. Now, we can see the black hole in that picture not because of the hole itself, but because of the material around it. So if we have a dynamic problem of cybersecurity, what if our quest for resilience could be measured not by what's there, but by what surrounds it? It's correct in a dynamic situation that we should be measuring what's going on now rather than looking back at the lagging metrics that have gone behind us. So let's ask the questions. How well have we combined people and technology to meet our goals rather than trying to depend on one or the other? We do need good cybersecurity education, but what is the impact of that education and how does that fit with the symbiosis of the people and the technology? Isn't it wrong that if one part of an organization is threatened and infected by an attack, that it spreads like wildfire throughout, taking advantage of the communications upon which we rely on? It's about time that we started to look at segmenting our networks and being able to contain problems when they arise. And we need to know when they are arising. The figures for intruders being on our networks before they're discovered are really worrying. We're talking an average of 80 days. In some parts of the world it's hundreds of days, and it can often take 60 days to purge them once they're discovered. And if you put all of those together, when something bad does happen, are we really resilient? Are we able to absorb the situation, or do we just add to the problems? So if we can find ways to measure those 5 aspects on our dashboard, our speed and our fuel consumption and our alertness, then perhaps we have got a fighting chance to fight the complexity of those who would attack us. The concept of risk came originally from sailing off into uncharted waters. Eventually, the concept of space was moved to time. When might an event take place that had to be dealt with? And it could also be viewed in a positive light. What do we need to do to increase the risk of us being able to meet our objectives, get to our destination? And as the science became more sophisticated, people would also look at probability and the impact as to how important different events were and be able to judge what investment would be needed to counteract them. And while we're on the history track, remember also that cyber comes from cybernetics, which is about communication and control, taking intelligence and being able to derive feedback to take positive actions as a result. After all, modern cybersecurity has its roots in communications and signals intelligence, so we should look to what we need to gather in terms of intelligence to derive a cyber pilotage rating. And I call it CPR for good reason, because it's about being able to react, to take the activity needed to recover and continue on the journey, not allowing ourselves to be overwhelmed by the problem, but to be able to absorb it in the true meaning of resilience. So that's where we've got to. From a technology readiness level, we might be generous and say we're at TRL 1 with the concept and the ideas. 5 things to look out for: our symbiotic design triggers, training, education, impact, threat resistant asset segmentation, active monitoring and detection, and coping and recovering capability. To have those 5 things embedded in our systems of technology and people. Ask yourself, in your organisation, in your community, personally, are you ready to traverse the cyber event horizon? Can you cope with the positive change of improvement or the negative change induced by an attack? With business continuity and so-called disaster recovery, you're never going to be the same people or organisation again. You've now had that experience and you're going to learn from it, one hopes. So, a black hole to pass through, but observing what's around it. Other analogies are available, perhaps more palatable ones. Would you earn your cyber pilotage rating? And if you could, how good would it be? Questions perhaps for another time. But if time allows, I'm happy to take questions now. Thank you for listening.